WWE Universe just witnessed something that will haunt Paul Heyman's nightmares forever. Roman Reigns didn't just return. He unleashed a monster so terrifying that Seth Rollins is in the hospital, Heyman is having a complete meltdown, and the entire WWE roster is looking over their shoulders. This isn't just another Bloodline reunion, this is a declaration of war, and the weapon Roman chose, a 280-pound Samoan Werewolf who moves like lightning and hits like a freight train. If you think you know what's coming at SummerSlam 2025, think again. What I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about the Tribal Chief's master plan. But first, smash that subscribe button because this story gets darker and more twisted than you can imagine. If you're still recovering from what happened on Raw last week, you're not alone. The entire wrestling world is trying to process what we just witnessed. For months, we've been watching Seth Rollins and his faction dominate WWE like they owned the place. The visionary, the architect, whatever you want to call him, Rollins was untouchable with Bronson Reed as his human bulldozer, Bron Breakker as his wrecking ball, and Paul Heyman pulling the strings behind the scenes. But then Roman Reigns returned. The Tribal Chief came back with Jey Uso by his side, and we all thought we knew what was coming. A classic Bloodline comeback story. We were wrong. Dead wrong. Because what Roman did next wasn't just a reunion. It was a hostile takeover that introduced the most dangerous man in professional wrestling today. Today, I'm breaking down exactly who this mystery monster is, why Paul Heyman looks like he's seen a ghost, what Roman whispered that made the wise man's knees buckle, and most importantly, what this means for SummerSlam 2025. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this isn't just another wrestling storyline. This is the beginning of a new era of dominance that will reshape WWE forever. To understand the earthquake that just hit WWE, we need to go back to where this war really began. For the past 8 months, Seth Rollins has been living his best life as the self-proclaimed visionary of WWE. But this wasn't just about one man's ego, this was about building an empire. Rollins didn't just want to be champion, he wanted to control the entire landscape of professional wrestling. Think about the chess moves Rollins made. First, he recruited Bronson Reed, a 330-pound monster from Australia who can move like a cruiserweight but hits like a semi-truck. Reed wasn't just muscle, he was a statement. When you saw Reed walking to the ring, you knew someone was about to get demolished. His tsunami splash became the most feared finishing move in WWE, and for good reason. I've watched this man put people through announce tables like they were made of paper. Then came Bron Breakker, the second-generation superstar with the bloodline of a legend and the intensity of a rabid dog. Breakker brought something different to the table. Raw, unbridled aggression combined with technical excellence. This guy could go from a picture-perfect suplex to an absolute brawl in seconds. He was Rollins' insurance policy, the young lion who could adapt to any situation. But the real masterstroke was Paul Heyman. The wise man didn't just join Rollins' faction. He became its brain. Heyman brought decades of experience, connections throughout the industry, and most importantly, intimate knowledge of Roman Reigns' weaknesses. Remember, Heyman was Roman's special counsel during the Tribal Chief's most dominant period. He knew every strategy, every psychological trigger, every way to get under Roman's skin. For months, this faction was unstoppable. They weren't just winning matches, they were dismantling careers. Kevin Owens, sidelined for 3 months after a brutal assault. Cody Rhodes barely escaped with his championship intact after multiple ambushes. The New Day split up after Reed put Kofi Kingston through the barricade so hard it took 4 men to carry him out. The WWE Universe was getting frustrated. Where was the resistance? Where was someone who could stand up to this tyranny? Social media was exploding with fans begging for a hero, for someone to restore balance to the chaos Rollins had created. That's when the rumors started. Whispers backstage about Roman Reigns making calls, about private meetings, about the Tribal Chief planning something big. But even the most connected insiders couldn't have predicted what was coming, because Roman wasn't just planning a comeback, he was orchestrating a revolution. The faction war that seemed so one-sided was about to become the most explosive conflict in WWE history, and the weapon Roman chose to end it, well, that's where our story takes a turn into absolute madness. Because when the Tribal Chief decides to go to war, he doesn't just bring soldiers, he brings monsters. Tonight, Roman Reigns' return will go down as one of the most electric moments in WWE history. But here's what most people missed. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a calculated strike designed to send a message that echoed through every locker room, every corporate office and every wrestling fan's living room around the world. Picture the scene. Raw was in Chicago, a city that knows good wrestling when it sees it. Seth Rollins was in the ring, microphone in hand, delivering another one of his visionary speeches about how he'd single-handedly saved WWE from mediocrity. The crowd was restless, tired of hearing the same arrogant rhetoric week after week. Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker flanked him like bodyguards while Paul Heyman stood at ringside with that smug smile we've all grown to hate. Then the music hit. Not just any music, Roman's music, but different. Darker, more ominous. The arena erupted, but there was something in the air that felt different from a typical return pop. This felt dangerous. Roman walked out, and immediately you could see he'd changed. Gone was the corporate-approved gear, replaced by something that looked more like battle armor. His eyes had a focus that we hadn't seen since his most dominant days as Universal Champion. But he wasn't alone. Jey Uso emerged beside him, and the brothers' body language told a story of reconciliation and renewed purpose. What happened next was pure psychological warfare. Roman didn't rush to the ring like a typical babyface return. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Seth Rollins. Every step was calculated to build tension, to make Rollins and his crew sweat. The crowd was on their feet, but you could feel the anticipation building to a breaking point. When Roman finally entered the ring, the confrontation was electric. Rollins tried to maintain his composure, but you could see the cracks forming. This wasn't the Roman Reigns he remembered. This was something more primal, more focused, more dangerous. The verbal exchange was brief but loaded with subtext. Roman didn't make threats, he made promises, and when the tribal chief makes a promise, people listen. The brawl that followed was absolute chaos. Roman and Jey moved like they'd never been apart, their chemistry as a team immediately apparent. They systematically dismantled Reed and Breakker, showing a level of coordination that spoke to hours of preparation. This wasn't a spontaneous reunion, this was a planned assault. But even as Roman stood tall in the ring, something felt incomplete. The crowd was going wild, but there was an undercurrent of expectation. Roman had returned, yes, but Rollins' faction was still too strong, too well organized. It would take more than just the tribal chief and Jey Uso to truly tip the scales. That's when Roman did something that sent chills down everyone's spine. He looked directly into the camera and mouthed 3 words that would change everything. This isn't over, because the tribal chief had one more card to play, one more weapon to unleash. And when he did, the entire landscape of WWE would never be the same. What happened next will be replayed in wrestling highlight reels for decades to come. The arena was still buzzing from Roman and Jey's dominant display when suddenly, the lights cut out. Complete darkness. The kind of silence that makes 15,000 people hold their breath simultaneously. Then a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, predatory footsteps echoing through the arena's sound system. When the lights came back up, he was there. Jacob Fatu, the Samoan Werewolf, standing in the ring like he'd materialized from Roman's darkest nightmares made flesh. At 6 feet 2 inches and 280 pounds of pure muscle and malice, Fatu didn't just enter the ring, he owned it. His presence was so commanding that even Roman seemed to take a step back, not out of fear, but out of respect for the monster he'd just unleashed. The crowd's reaction was unlike anything I've ever heard. It wasn't just surprise, it was primal recognition of danger. Fans who had never seen Fatu wrestle before instinctively knew they were looking at something special, something terrifying. Social media exploded instantly. #Samoan Werewolf started trending worldwide within minutes. Wrestling journalists were frantically typing, trying to be the first to break down what this meant for the industry. But the real magic happened when Fatu moved. This isn't just another big man who relies on power moves. Fatu combines the agility of a cruiserweight with the devastating impact of a super heavyweight. His first target was Bron Breakker, the young lion who thought he was the toughest guy in the room. Fatu moved like lightning, catching Breakker with a pop-up Samoan drop that echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Breakker, who had been dominating opponents for months, was unconscious before he hit the mat. Bronson Reed tried to mount a comeback, charging at Fatu with all 330 pounds of Australian fury. Big mistake. Fatu sidestepped like a matador, grabbed Reed by the throat and launched him over the top rope with such force that Reed crashed through the barricade and into the front row. The human bulldozer who had been unstoppable for months was reduced to a broken heap in seconds. Then came the moment that will haunt Seth Rollins forever. The visionary, the architect, the man who thought he had all the answers, found himself face to face with a problem he couldn't solve. Fatu didn't just attack Rollins, he dismantled him. A spinning powerbomb onto the steel steps that was so brutal, so devastating that even hardened wrestling fans turned away. The sound of impact was sickening. Rollins' body went limp immediately. Medical personnel rushed to the ring, but the damage was done. As they loaded Rollins onto a stretcher, Fatu stood over him like a predator, admiring his kill. No emotion, no celebration, just cold satisfaction. The message was clear. This is what happens when you cross the bloodline. The arena was in stunned silence as the reality sank in. The faction war wasn't over. It had just escalated to a level nobody was prepared for. Roman Reigns hadn't just returned. He'd brought hell with him. In all my years covering professional wrestling, I've never seen Paul Heyman look genuinely terrified. The wise man has stared down monsters, managed legends, and survived every political backstabbing WWE has to offer. But when Roman Reigns leaned in and whispered something in his ear while Jacob Fatu stood guard like a loyal attack dog, Heyman's face went white as a sheet. The cameras couldn't pick up the audio, but they captured every micro-expression on Heyman's face. First came recognition. He understood exactly what Roman was telling him. Then fear. Pure, unadulterated terror as the implications sank in. Finally, resignation. The look of a man who realizes he's been outplayed by a master strategist. So what did Roman say? WWE is keeping those words locked away tighter than Fort Knox, but I've got sources, and I've been analyzing every clue. Based on Heyman's reaction and the context of their history, I believe Roman delivered a message that was both personal and professional, cutting right to the heart of Heyman's deepest insecurities. Remember, Paul Heyman was Roman's special counsel during the Tribal Chief's most dominant period. He was there for every victory, every title defense, every moment of glory. But when Roman lost the Universal Championship and his momentum stalled, Heyman jumped ship faster than a rat fleeing a sinking vessel. He abandoned Roman when the Tribal Chief needed him most, choosing to align himself with Seth Rollins and his rising faction. My theory, Roman told Heyman exactly what he thought of that betrayal, but more importantly, he outlined what was coming next. Not just revenge. That's too simple for someone as calculating as Roman Reigns. This was about systematic destruction. Roman likely detailed how he was going to dismantle everything Heyman had built with Rollins piece by piece, until the wise man had nothing left. But here's the truly terrifying part. Roman probably offered Heyman a choice. Join the new bloodline willingly and accept a subordinate role, or be destroyed along with everyone else who stood in the Tribal Chief's way. For a man like Heyman, who's built his entire career on being the power behind the throne, the idea of becoming just another soldier in Roman's army would be devastating. The psychological warfare was masterful. By whispering instead of shouting, Roman made it personal, intimate, inescapable. Heyman couldn't dismiss it as typical wrestling bravado because it was delivered with the quiet confidence of a man who holds all the cards. And with Jacob Fatu standing right there, radiating menace like a human weapon, the threat wasn't theoretical, it was immediate and very real. Watch Heyman's body language in the weeks following that moment. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence now looks over his shoulder constantly. He jumps at shadows, second-guesses every decision, and you can see the stress eating away at him. That's what happens when you realize you've made an enemy of someone who doesn't just want to beat you, he wants to erase you from the equation entirely. The whisper heard round the wrestling world has set the stage for the most personal, most brutal faction war in WWE history. Jacob Fatu isn't just another wrestler. He's a force of nature wrapped in Samoan tradition and unleashed with surgical precision. To understand why Roman Reigns chose him as his ultimate weapon, you need to understand what makes Fatu unlike anyone else in professional wrestling today. First, let's talk about his pedigree. The Anoa'i family tree reads like a who's who of wrestling royalty. The Rock, Roman Reigns, the Usos, Rikishi, Yokozuna, and countless others who've shaped the industry. But even in this legendary bloodline, Jacob Fatu stands apart. He's not just carrying on tradition, he's evolving it into something more dangerous, more unpredictable. Physically, Fatu is a contradiction that shouldn't exist. At 280 pounds, he should be a lumbering powerhouse, but instead he moves with the fluid grace of someone half his size. His moonsault, a move that sees him flip backward off the top rope, defies physics and common sense. When a man that size launches himself through the air with that kind of precision, it's not just impressive, it's terrifying. But technique is only part of what makes Fatu special. It's his psychology, his understanding of how to weaponize fear, that sets him apart. Watch his matches from the independent circuit, and you'll see a pattern. Fatu doesn't just defeat opponents, he breaks their will to fight. He has an uncanny ability to identify exactly what his opponent fears most and then exploit that weakness with surgical precision. His signature moves tell the story of a man who studied violence as an art form. The pop-up Samoan drop looks simple until you realize the timing and strength required to catch a charging opponent and drive them into the mat with that kind of impact. The spinning powerbomb isn't just a finishing move, it's a statement that says, I can end you whenever I choose. What makes Fatu truly dangerous is his unpredictability. Traditional powerhouses follow patterns. They rely on strength and intimidation. Technical wrestlers stick to their game plans. High flyers depend on speed and agility. Fatu seamlessly blends all these styles while adding an element of chaos that keeps opponents constantly off balance. One moment he's executing a picture-perfect technical sequence. The next he's launching himself off the top rope like a guided missile. The psychological impact of Fatu's presence cannot be overstated. When he walks to the ring, you can feel the atmosphere change. Crowds that were cheering moments before fall silent, not out of disrespect, but out of recognition that they're witnessing something primal and dangerous. Even veteran wrestlers who've seen everything the industry has to offer admit that Fatu makes them uncomfortable in a way that's hard to articulate. Roman Reigns understood all of this when he made the decision to bring Fatu into the Bloodline. The tribal chief needed more than just another family member. He needed a weapon that could single-handedly shift the balance of power in WWE. Fatu represents the perfect fusion of Samoan warrior tradition and modern wrestling evolution, making him not just a valuable addition to the Bloodline, but its most dangerous asset. Roman Reigns has always been a chess player in a world full of checkers enthusiasts, but his latest gambit reveals a level of strategic thinking that's almost frightening in its scope and precision. This isn't just about getting revenge on Seth Rollins or reclaiming championship gold. This is about establishing a dynasty that will dominate WWE for the next decade. The first phase of Roman's plan was psychological warfare. By staying away from WWE for months, he allowed Rollins' faction to grow comfortable, complacent even. They began to believe their own hype, thinking they had permanently eliminated the Bloodline threat. This overconfidence made them vulnerable, and Roman was counting on exactly that reaction. Phase 2 was the reunion with Jey Uso, but not just any reunion. A carefully orchestrated reconciliation that sent a message to the entire roster. By bringing Jey back into the fold publicly and emotionally, Roman demonstrated that the Bloodline's bonds are stronger than any temporary setback. This wasn't just about healing family wounds, it was about showing the wrestling world that the Bloodline's foundation is unshakable. But Phase 3, the introduction of Jacob Fatu, this is where Roman's true genius becomes apparent. Fatu wasn't just a surprise addition. He was a strategic nuclear option that Roman had been holding in reserve. While everyone was focused on the obvious players in this faction war, Roman was quietly recruiting the most dangerous free agent in professional wrestling. The timing of Fatu's debut was perfect. Rollins' faction was at their most confident, having dominated WWE for months without serious opposition. They had grown used to being the hunters, not the hunted. Fatu's arrival instantly flipped that dynamic, turning the predators into prey overnight. Roman's long-term vision extends far beyond SummerSlam 2025. He's not just building a faction, he's creating a wrestling empire that can adapt and evolve. Jey Uso brings experience and family loyalty. Jacob Fatu provides raw power and unpredictability. But Roman is already thinking about future additions, future challenges, future opportunities to expand the Bloodline's influence. The beauty of Roman's strategy is its flexibility. If Rollins recovers from his injuries and returns stronger than ever, the Bloodline is ready. If new challenges emerge from NXT or other promotions, they have the infrastructure to adapt. If WWE's landscape shifts dramatically, Roman has positioned the Bloodline to not just survive but thrive in any environment. Perhaps most importantly, Roman has learned from his previous mistakes. His first run as the head of the Bloodline was built on dominance through traditional means: championship reigns, main event matches, corporate backing. This new iteration is built on something more fundamental: fear, respect, and the understanding that the Bloodline isn't just a wrestling faction, it's a way of life. The master plan isn't just about winning matches or holding titles. It's about establishing the Bloodline as the permanent power structure in WWE, with Roman as the undisputed tribal chief and Jacob Fatu as his enforcer. Everything else, championships, storylines, individual feuds, are just details in service of this larger vision. Wrestling fans, what we've just witnessed isn't just another storyline, it's the beginning of a new era in WWE. Roman Reigns hasn't just returned, he's declared war on everyone who thought the Bloodline was finished. With Jey Uso by his side and Jacob Fatu as his secret weapon, the tribal chief has assembled the most dangerous faction in wrestling history. Seth Rollins is in the hospital, his faction is in shambles, and Paul Heyman is running scared for the first time in decades. But this is just the beginning. SummerSlam 2025 is going to be a bloodbath, and I have a feeling we haven't seen the last surprise Roman has in store for us. The question isn't whether the Bloodline will dominate, it's how long it will take them to completely reshape WWE in their image. Jacob Fatu has already proven he's the most dangerous man in wrestling today, and with Roman's strategic mind guiding him, there might not be anyone who can stop this new Bloodline. But here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Roman's master plan will work? Can anyone stop Jacob Fatu? And most importantly, is Paul Heyman going to betray his own faction to save his skin? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I read every single one and respond to as many as I can. Until then, keep acknowledging your tribal chief, stay tuned for more wrestling content that goes deeper than anyone else, and I'll see you in the next video. The Bloodline is back, Jacob Fatu is unleashed, and WWE will never be the same again.